Welcome back. Today we're looking at the Iliad, Book 16, which is one of the key books in the poem. If you've just been looking at the highlight reel rather than reading the entire story, this is definitely one to stop and look at closely. But before we get to one of the biggest turning points in the entire poem, let's stop and look at who the key characters are in this section. The first is the character we've been waiting to shine through the whole book, and that is Patroclus. Achilles' right-hand man, his closest friend. A man who has shown lots and lots of empathy for the Greeks, even as he's set out with his friend Achilles. But now Patroclus is going to go into battle, and he's going to apply that empathy in his incredible strength. And honestly, he's a pretty fantastic fighter. His fight scenes are great. Our next character is Achilles, who does not yet go into the action, but we will definitely get some development of Achilles at this point in the book, which is going to gear us up for the later climax. Achilles has held on to his resistance to fighting for a little too long at this point. And we can see how his unwillingness to join the battle previously may have been justified at first, and he found a few different reasons to rationalize it. But now he really can't seem to just get back into the battle. He had a great opportunity to do so earlier when they came and begged for his help, but he decided to hold out a little longer, and we can see at this point, perhaps he's held on a little too long. We also get the character Hector in this book, and although Hector shows himself to be a noble, heroic man near the beginning of the book, by this point he's gotten definitely cocky, even obnoxiously so. And nothing he's really done in the book so far has been that great without massive backing from the gods. He's been bested by Diomedes, he's been bested by Ajax multiple times, and his great moments of heroism have been completely because the gods were shilling for him. By now, we've gotten a little annoyed with him, and we will continue to do so. We're also going to see one of my favorite heroes on the Trojan side, Sarpedon. And Sarpedon is going to have a pretty dramatic moment here. And Sarpedon's close friend, Glaucus, is also going to step in and have another moment as well. Both of them shine as heroes, especially as Hector, who's supposed to be the greatest on their team, really doesn't. Several of the gods will get little bits here, but Apollo definitely has a huge hand in supporting the Trojan side and keeping them afloat, while Zeus has a difficult choice to make. He's got his plan is finally in action, but in the middle of it, he's going to have a slight moment of doubt, which is pretty great. Okay, let's look at the action of this fantastic book. The book begins as Patroclus runs up to Achilles, and he is clearly emotionally distraught. He's just been watching the Greeks get completely destroyed. And we've seen how he's reacted to that throughout the book. He's on Achilles' side. He's been sitting out for Achilles' sake. But as the book has gone on, he's become more and more distressed over the pain and suffering he sees among his other friends in the Greek camp. Achilles asks him why he's so emotional, and so Patroclus lays out the problem. So many of the Greek heroes have been knocked out of the fighting due to injuries. And here Achilles is, just sitting here stubborn and heartless. Maybe he's scared of some prophecy or whatever, but at least he could send Patroclus out there in his armor to fight the Trojans. And with Patroclus, with the Myrmidons at his back, as soon as he hits the field, the Trojans will see somebody coming out who looks like Achilles in his armor, and that may be enough to turn the tide. Achilles responds, and he brushes off the prophecy thing that seems so important when the emissaries came to him in his camp. He also seems like he's finally cooled off about Agamemnon. He's still irritated at Agamemnon, but he's about ready to let go of his anger. It's just that he said he would wait until the fighting got all the way to his ship. That's the moment he planned on turning things around. And so then he says, all right, I'll let you go, Patroclus. You can take my armor, you can scare off those Trojans. But he tells Patroclus to do two things for him. Number one, drive the Trojans off of the ships. But number two, do not follow the Trojans out onto the field. Don't try to pursue Hector. Just give the Greeks enough space for some breathing room. Keep them from absolutely being destroyed. At this moment, the book cuts to Ajax, who is at the absolute moment of exhaustion. The Trojans have been pressing him so hard with the power of Apollo on their side, and Ajax has been fighting with his own strength. His arm is exhausted, he's drenched in sweat. His spear has gotten chopped in half, and so he's basically just fighting with a stick at this point. And he's still managing to hold them off. And the poet calls on the muse to sing about the burning of the ships. And we see the moment when Hector finally pushes Ajax far enough back to light the ship on fire. And there it goes. And so Ajax, who is weaponless, has to jump out of the way as the ship begins to burn. And as Achilles looks up and sees the ship on fire, and he's standing there with Patroclus, he finally realizes it's time to send Patroclus out here. And so he hands his armor over to Patroclus, and he calls his Myrmidon captains. And so there's a quick rundown of who his leaders are of the Myrmidons. And he tells them, I know you've been chomping at the bit and angry that we haven't been going out to fight, but now's your chance. Go with Patroclus and win this fight. And after pumping them up, he turns around and walks to a special case in his tent, where he pulls out this special cup for wine. And he always pours out a cup of wine for Zeus from this cup. And so he fills the cup with wine and pours it out before Zeus to say a special prayer for Patroclus. And he prays for two things. One, Zeus, please let Patroclus win this fight. Let him beat back the Trojans. And number two, please let him come back safely. And Zeus decides to answer half of that prayer. And so the Myrmidons rush out like a swarm of wasps upon the Trojans. And as the Trojans look up and see what looks like Achilles running toward them with all the Myrmidons, they panic. And Patroclus goes on a killing spree, and the Myrmidons are on fire, and as soon as the other Greek heroes see this turn, they begin to be charged up again, and they start doing excellent work again as well. And Hector wants to stand firm, but quickly the rout turns, and all of the Trojans rush away. Not only that, but on the way back to the trench, although Apollo stomped it going across one way, their chariots get gummed up in the trench on their way back, which leads them to disaster. And as Patroclus starts rushing through them, just slashing and destroying left and right. Patroclus gets a ridiculous number of kills in this book. It just rattles off the names. And so as the Trojans are just being completely slaughtered, Sarpedon looks up, sees Patroclus, and says, somebody's got to take this guy out. And so Sarpedon rushes to fight with Patroclus. And just as the two of them rush at each other, Zeus pauses and looks down and says, I don't want Sarpedon to die. It's all part of the plan and everything, but can we just maybe spare Sarpedon? He's my son. I could just maybe snap him up and put him somewhere else. And as he's really hesitating, Hera says, no, Sarpedon is supposed to die. He's fated to die. It's been written as his fate long ago. And you can, okay, because you're the king of gods, snap your fingers and change things, but nobody's going to respect you if you do. Go ahead and let him die a hero in battle. That's the honorable thing to do. And then you can have his body carried back to his home. And so Zeus goes, okay. But then he lets it rain blood for a minute before Sarpedon dies. That's got to be a little bit intimidating on the battlefield when blood suddenly starts raining down. And so the two of them go up against each other. Sarpedon throws a spear, misses, and kills one of the horses. And Automedon has to jump up there and cut the horse free from the reins. And then Sarpedon throws again, but this time he just barely misses. It goes right over Patroclus' shoulder. And then Patroclus throws his spear. And he takes Sarpedon full in the gut. And Sarpedon collapses on the field. And as he's dying, he calls out to Glaucus to protect his body. He doesn't want his body to be taken by the Greeks. And Patroclus jumps out and rips the spear out of his gut, killing him. Glaucus responds because there is his friend Sarpedon just dying there on the field. But Glaucus, if you remember from a few books ago, got shot in the arm by Teucer. And he can no longer grip his spear. And so he wants to defend his friend's body, but he has no strength. And so he cries out to the gods for help. He says, please heal my wound and give me strength so that I can at least fight over my friend's dead body. And Apollo comes in and heals him. And the wound stops bleeding and it heals up and he feels his strength back in his arm. And so then he rushes forward to defend Sarpedon's body. And as he's rushing up there, he calls to Hector and says, "Hector, man up and come help me! Sarpedon is down." And Sarpedon's death hits the Trojans really, really hard. Even though he wasn't from Troy, he was one of the strongest of their fighters. And so there comes this intense moment when Patroclus calls to Ajax and the rest of the heroes to come help him take the body of Sarpedon. And the Trojans, Hector and the others, rush forward to try to rescue his body. And so the fighting over Sarpedon's body is intense. We have Meriones and Aeneas who are fighting back and forth. We have Glaucus who makes a kill. And Zeus is sitting there wondering, how am I going to kill Patroclus? He's got to die somewhere in this battle. Does he die right now, or do I do a little bit more damage first? And so Zeus decides to let Patroclus's rampage continue for a while. And so he puts fear into the heart of Hector again, and Hector turns and flees, which is incredibly frustrating. Of course, it's definitely the gods meddling, but Glaucus, who had just called for Hector's support, is now driven back. And Glaucus is not going to quickly forget Hector running away and leaving Sarpedon on the field. But Sarpedon does not get taken by either side. The Greeks get his armor, yes, but his body is snatched up by Apollo, who hands it over to Sleep and Death, who carry him home to his home country. They're gonna at least give him that honor because of what a great warrior he was. But Patroclus continues his charge in the chariot with Automedon, and they are just, again, barreling down the field, slaughtering people left and right. You get whole stanzas of names that Patroclus has slaughtered. He gets all the way to the walls of Troy, and we see, though, that Patroclus, in his frenzy, has forgotten the words of Achilles. Achilles told him not to pursue, but he keeps on charging forward. He gets all the way up to the walls of Troy and even begins to scale them. And he probably would have taken the city, the book says, if Apollo had not stood at the top of the wall and kept flicking Patroclus off of it. By the third time he climbs up, Apollo says, "Hey, Patroclus, you can't take the city. The gods say no. Get the point." Finally, Patroclus pulls back from the wall, but he keeps on fighting. Hector decides to charge Patroclus, hoping that Apollo will help him win the fight. But it's a fail, because Patroclus kills his driver, Cebriones. And there's another fight over his body, and the Greeks finally drag him off and take his armor. And Patroclus makes 3 more charges, each time killing 9 men, the book says. His glory is mounting up and up and up as he is the absolute most destructive fighter that the Greeks have fielded so far. And all of this builds to a crescendo when finally he is taken down. As he's making his 3rd charge, Apollo comes behind him and smacks him really hard, knocking off his helmet, his breastplate, his spear, and his shield. Basically giving him a concussion because the book says that he's all fuzzy now and can't see very clearly. But even now, he's still dangerous, even though he's now unarmed and half of his armor is missing. As he's stunned from Apollo's blow, Euphorbus comes up behind him and spears him. But even in this state, Euphorbus is too scared of Patroclus to keep fighting him, and so he runs away. Patroclus, who's just lost his armor and weapons, who's been speared in the back, is stumbling back towards his lines, Hector waiting, watching the great-hearted Patroclus trying to stagger free, seeing him wounded there with a sharp bronze, came rushing into him right across the lines and rammed his spear shaft home, stabbing deep in the bowels, and the brazen point went jutting straight out through Patroclus' back. Down he crashed. Horror gripped the Achaean armies. And Hector gets really big-headed at this moment and says, "Ha! I bet you thought you could take me out. I bet Achilles sent you out here to kill me. And look what happened to you. I just beat you." And Patroclus, who's got a huge hole in his back and his gut, is coughing up blood, and with his final dying words points out to Hector that there is no glory in this kill. "You may get credit for my death, but you were the 3rd person to hit me in a row. First, you had to have me all warmed up by god Apollo and Euphorbus. Once I was already limping, then you could come in and make the kill. You wuss." Not only that, but Achilles is going to get you. And then Patroclus dies. And Hector just laughs at the thought of Achilles coming for him. "Why, Patroclus? Why prophesy my doom, my sudden death? Who knows? Achilles, the son of sleek-haired Thetis, may outrace me, struck by my spear first, and gasp away his life. Ah!" And he puts his heel on Patroclus' chest and rips the spear out. And so Patroclus dies, which is going to put in motion the events of the rest of the book. Okay, let's look at some of the key features of this section. First of all, there is another invocation of the Muse, as the poet calls to the Muse to help tell the story of the lighting of the ships, since this is a key moment that turns the tide. It's the moment we've been waiting for to start the chain of events that will lead to the end of the book. There's also all the great Homeric epithets throughout this. The characters often get a little catchphrase attached to their name, and in this one we see lots for Patroclus, including "Oh my rider," Patroclus, "Oh my rider," which gives a deep sense of sympathy for him since he gets one huge blaze of glory here. We also see the poetic repetition. In this section, some of Hera's words are repeated 2 other times in the book, near the beginning and near the end. Moments when the gods get unhappy with Zeus seeming as though he's about to change his mind. Finally, there's the overall theme of fate, which is very strong in this particular book. The moment that Sarpedon dies, it has been fated from before, and Zeus would like to change it, but he sticks to the plan. There is that sense that no matter how hard people fight, ultimately some things are fated to happen that cannot be turned or changed. We see that also in Patroclus' death, and in the actions that will ultimately lead to the deaths of Hector and Achilles. The next book, 17, will deal with what happens to Patroclus' body. Thanks for watching. You can click to subscribe or watch another video, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.